Hello everyone, Salam, Namaste, Adab, and welcome to today's event. Today we are going to have a uh, revisit of Muslim past. Um, the case is the case of Hyderabad Deccan, and the speaker is from Hyderabad Deccan, presently here in University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Afsar Mohammad. He teaches in the University of Pennsylvania. He's a poet. He will be formally introduced by another poet, English teacher, Dr. Basudhara Roy at Karim City College, Kolan University, Jharkhand. So Basudhara will be introducing him and probably some theme. The concluding remarks will be given by Muhammad Ayub Khan, who is a researcher based in Toronto. His focus is also on Hyderabad, Muslim issues, all those things related to minorities. He's still doing a PhD in political science from, I think, University of Toronto. So welcome you all. And now I invite Dr. Basudhara Roy for a formal introduction for the event. Welcome.
Greetings to everyone who has joined across different time zones. We are very grateful to be here at the Indian Diaspora Washington, D.C. Metro Forum and to be hosting this special talk on revisiting Muslim past, the case of Hyderabad Deccan. History and the textuality of history has long been a concern for historians, for people from literature, from psychology, because history is a discipline where so many other disciplines converge. What exactly or how much exactly does history owe to objectivity? How much does it owe to subjectivity? How one person's history and memory can vary from another person's account of the same incident. These are questions that have perplexed historians who assumed that history would be a discipline that would render some kind of order, some kind of objectivity, some kind of distance to the past. To discuss this and various other issues today, we have a very, very interesting session that talks about a book that's called Remaking History. So the story that this book follows begins on August 15th, 1947, as the new nation states of India and Pakistan prepare to negotiate land and power. The citizens of the princely state of Hyderabad experienced the unraveling of an intense political conflict between the Union Government of India and the local ruler, the Nizam of Hyderabad. The author explains how the state of Hyderabad was struggling to produce its own tools of cultural renaissance and modernity in the background of the Union government's deployment of the Central Army. The various facets that this book explores through oral histories derived from both Muslims and non-Muslims, and the wide variety of written sources and historical documents that it accesses will tell you about an intense moment of new politics and cultural discourse that unravels and that has largely been eclipsed over the years. The speaker today, Professor Afsar Mohammad, is an internationally acclaimed and award-winning South Asian scholar working on Hindu-Muslim interactions in India. He also focuses on Muslim writing and Telugu studies. A poet as well, he teaches at the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. His previously published work, The Festival of Peace, Popular Islam and Shared Devotion in South India, has received high praise for its contributions to the study of vernacular Islam. We shall also be joined by Muhammad Ayub Khan, who will be delivering his comments post the lecture by Professor Mohammad. So Muhammad Ayub Khan is a Toronto-based researcher. He holds a BA in political science from York University, Toronto, and an MA in comparative politics from McMaster University, Hamilton. His academic research is focused on Muslim minority communities. His special areas of interest being Hyderabad studies, affirmative action, social cohesion, and constitutional provisions for religious minorities. He has published academic articles in prestigious journals like the Journal of Muslim Minority Affairs, Muslim World Book Review, Journal of Fraser Valley University, Sikh Studies, etc. We are very grateful to the Indian Washington Diaspora DC Metro Group for hosting this important conversation today, and we hope that everyone present in the audience will take a slice of an eclipsed history away from this evening or morning for you. Over to you, Professor Afsar Mohammad.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Raziuddin Sahib and family, for this great opportunity to talk to you all today. And then I really appreciate your time and patience for making out time and being here. And then thank you so much, Vasudhara ji, for a generous introduction. And then my dear friend Ayub Ali Khan for being here to offer concluding remarks. So today, actually, I'm really thankful to Vasudhara Roy for her um, ideas, and then basically she gave a sense of what I'm going to do today, and then how this talk would be. So it's a kind of great sense of direction. Thank you for that. And then the trajectory that you provided, conceptual trajectory of history, memory, and subjectivity. So these three aspects are like crucial in my work, not only in this particular book, but also like in my previous work on Muharram in Hyderabad and then non-Hyderabadi context. So I just want to, since Basudhara Rai opened this session touching on the idea of memory, and then also there are other aspects like the politics of history in contemporary, not only in India, but also like worldwide. It's a global concept, right? So there is a lot of concerns about how history should be narrated, and then what event should be selected for the narration, and then who is doing this selection, and then what are the major components in this kind of selection, right? So there is an axis of selection when talking about past. This is more in the case of Muslim past, particularly in the context where even Mughal history, the crucial, the paradigmatic Mughal history itself is being challenged and contested, and then there is an effort. There is like an official hegemonic system that is trying to erase Mughal history itself. Today, I see here my favorite scholar, Barbara Metcalf, in the audience. Of course, you are all familiar with her work, and then it's so important, particularly like how scholars like Metcalf introduced these ideas of conceptual history and the place of memory and the tensions between memory and history. So I'm always thankful to Metcalf's path-breaking and pioneering work, particularly when it comes to Indian history, Muslim history particularly. So revisiting Muslim past is such a crucial aspect at this point that we need to understand why should we revisit Muslim past. That's the first question we need to ask. And then how this revisitation should work. What are the components of this revisiting? And then what are the main features of this Muslim past? But my case study is confined to Hyderabad, and then particularly 1948 police action. which Basudhara Roy already introduced about this event. But I want to of course, I will also talk about introduce this event, and then how I also want to emphasize how this event becomes a metaphor for Muslim discourse. And then the location itself, Hyderabad, is key in this discourse because Hyderabad, in many ways, in many post colonial and then modern discourses, provided a model to talk about Muslim discourse. So that is going to be my major focus today. And then before doing that, let me introduce this is the book Vasudhara was talking about Hyderabad, not, about Muharram practices in non-Hyderabadi context. This is called the Festival of Peers, the Festival of Saints. In Telugu, it is called Pirla Pandaga. Of course, which is the idea of Pandaga means Pandaga is festival. That itself is not acceptable to Muslims because it's a commemorative event. But in the context of non-Hyderabadi performances, non-Hyderabadi Moharram rituals, this becomes a festival because in Telangana context, martyrdom, death, these concepts are also not just sorrowful, they also, despite that sorrowful environment, they also offer an inspiration. So whichever provides inspiration, that also becomes festival in this context. So that way it is festival, not in its a conceptual level. Okay, so this book actually talks about these three aspects: the multiplicity of local Islam, everyday Muslim life, but the focus is more on Hindu-Muslim interactions. So these are the three aspects that have become more debatable in contemporary Muslim discourse. Particularly, my journey is with Hindu-Muslim interactions, right? How Hindus and Muslims interact within these historical movements, and then how do they narrate these kind of interaction. So even in the case of Hyderabad police action, there was lot of exchange between Hindus and Muslims. So in many ways, my second book, just published last year, this Remaking History, actually touches on these three aspects also. So how do we define local Islam? So what are the components in local Islam? My basic argument is that local Islam is a pluralist Islam, is a cosmopolitan Islam. So multiplicity and diversity define its nature. So this is something to do with everyday Muslim life as well, because everyday Muslim life is so connected to Hindu dimension of everyday life, Hindu dimension of festivals, commemorative events, and then devotionalism. So we need to speak about local Islam as it is related to this local devotionalism, ibadat. So how does this ibadat work? Is all like the focus in this book, and then in the context of Muharram, the because of the focus on the history of Karbala, and then history of prophetic traditions, history of Husseiniyyat, still play a crucial role in the making of Hyderabadi discourse in the context of 1948 events. So a lot of my the witnesses of police action during the conversation, they often refer to Karbala. So I will explain how that works later. But we need to understand that there is some dialogue happening between two historical events here. One, the history of Karbala, and the other one is history of police action in Hyderabad. So how Muslims understood Karbala and police action. So this is like one of the most important dimensions that we rarely discuss in contemporary Muslim studies. So as Vasudhara was discussing, talking about memory, I want to like begin with these words from my interview with Abdul Qudus Saheb, who was a Marsiya singer in Karimnagar village, a town in Telangana. So I actually interviewed him in 2006. He was 80 years old at that point. And then he said, the police action was an end of many good things in our lives. We lost not only many friends, our personal careers, houses, and the most importantly, the beautiful light, ihsan, and the tehzeeb, culture of our everyday life. If someone says it is just about a few Muslims, no, not at all. It is a pain about the entire community of the then Hyderabad and Telangana. So, throughout our conversations, Abdul Hudus Sahib was talking about these two major concepts that are very specific to Hyderabadi Muslim identity. One is the ihsan, the beauty of life. The other one is tehzeeb, which is often cited in even in contemporary discourses, particularly in the context of Hindu-Muslim interactions. So throughout, but not only Kudu Sahib, but also like for this book, I interviewed like 150 witnesses of the police action. So most of them, like of course Muslims, but they're like at least 40% of non-Muslims, including Hindus and then Christians. So most of them, they were using similar terminology. The way Hudu Sahib were used in our conversation. So this is like why this Muslim terminology such as Hisam, Tahjeeb, Milansar, these are equally important for non-Muslims in Hyderabad, Deccan, and then other regions in the Telugu Urdu speaking states. So they were using them not in Islamic context, but even though there are some traces of Islamic element there, they are using more it as a local expression of culture, particularly the term tehzeeb. It is very common, even in like when you speak to some Telugu person, he or she would automatically like use that term to talk about Hyderabadi culture or Telangana culture. So, but the way Kudu Sahib was explaining to me about this is this picture actually a Moharram procession in Telangana village. Tajias decorated tajias as a symbol of Hussein and Hassan and other family members of the Prophet. So these stories about Prophet Fatima, Zahra, Ali, Hussein, and Hassan, Qasim, these are so important in many Telangana places. So what Hudu Sahib was saying that because of the violence that happened between September 13th to September 18th, 1948, the entire beauty of life was gone. And then that was one of the like incidents that actually blocked the idea of tehzeeb. However, during the same conversation, they were also saying that, okay, of course, this is like this is like an official, like bureaucratic and then nationalistic idea, but that kind of didn't work. While ordinary people still follow the same tehzeeb and then the same ihsan of Islamic ideas. So with that, I just want to talk about this police action of 1948, which is the base of my new work. So between September 13th and 17th, this is the picture of army on the streets everywhere in Hyderabad and then Telangana. And then between just in 5 days, according to the Sundarlal Committee, which was appointed by the Nehru government, there were 27,000 to 40,000 Muslims were killed. But Sundarlal Committee basically said they were Muslims. But when I was talking to these people like Abdul Qudus Sahib and other witnesses, they were saying that it's not just Muslims who were killed. There were a lot of Hindus, Christians in Hyderabad and then other parts of Deccan. Often we think that because of the insufficient work on history, we often end up that, okay, there was not much happening in Hyderabad or surroundings or in Telangana villages. But during my witness interviews, I heard that there were many violent incidents in the districts of Khammam, Medak, Nalgonda, Karimnagar, and other regions. Of course, Hyderabad was still like peaceful at that point because relatively peaceful is not relatively quiet, right? But the other dimension of this violence was some thousands migrated to Pakistan and other parts of the world. So when I gave a talk in Chicago 2 months back, so there were like Muslims, Hyderabadi Muslims, who, when they were children, they witnessed this violence, and then they grew up with that violence, and then their families moved to places like Chicago, California, and then other places. I'm sure there are like Hyderabadi Muslims elsewhere as well. So the diaspora of Muslims, they're like a big number of diaspora who particularly migrated after 1948, but who witnessed 1948, they might have migrated to these places much later. And then Pakistani, actually, last week I was in like South Asia conference in Madison, Wisconsin, where I happened to meet many Pakistani Muslim friends. They were talking about like how migration, displacement that led to this like most Muslim families, particularly they were displaced and then migrated to Karachi, Lahore, and then Hyderabad, Pakistan. So there are a lot of work that we need to do as far as migration and displacement is concerned, particularly among the diaspora Muslims. We still have we don't have enough data to talk about that displacement and migration. Because also my work basically focuses on Hyderabad, and then it's not much about displacement and then migration. But what we learn from the police action is that, okay, there is this effort to create the nation state, union government, and then there was a constant effort to integrate princely states, including Kashmir and Hyderabad, into the union government of India. So there was this idea of nationalism, singular nationalism being represented in political philosophy and then historical perspectives. So every identity they wanted to pursue them within this singular nationalism. But the argument at that point in places like Kashmir and Hyderabad was that how could you impose this singular nationalism, particularly in the context of like a lot of diversity and pluralism in India. And this is like unfair when you think about Muslims in India, particularly in three states. Like Kashmir, we know the situation in Kashmir, but Hyderabad was not that like different at that point. But only unfortunately, we don't have sufficient historical data to understand what happened exactly in Hyderabad state at that point. So there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation being circulated. The New York Times, the Times, um, of course, you are all familiar with that newspaper. They had a very like special, exclusive group of journalists traveling and reporting on the police action, particularly between September 13th until September 17th. They also reported after September 17th. But the Times News Magazine, of course, which also published a special issue on Usman Khan and then Hyderabad much later, or maybe during the same time. But they came up with this very interesting terminology. So the way they reported it, this is where we can see disinformation and misinformation as far as such incidents are concerned. So they used this phrase happy war to describe what happened in Hyderabad state. That's such a paradoxical usage, ironical statement. And then that is how they want to like project the police action in their official documentation. But if you look into this map, you can clearly see between 13th of September to 15th of September, like 17th of September, like this, the map clearly shows how they invaded. This is the term I want to use or emphasize. This is not police action. It's actually invasion. So you see they surrounded, cordoned off Hyderabad state from different directions. Each day, this map actually clearly shows how each day they cordoned off and then tried to bring military, and they are not just military, there are like different forces working there. And then this map shows force levels, thrust lines, and progress of operations between 13th to 17th September. So while many witness narratives during my like interviews, they said, "Oh, that is such a like paradoxical usage of the terminology. Is there anything like happy war? Is any war happy?" That was the question they were raising at that point. And then they used the term massacre, Khub Rezi in Urdu, and then Uchakota in Telugu. So those are like common words being used to describe police action. And then these are some missing links. Why this history was not properly documented at that point? There is this one, three reasons is like mainstream histories never allowed historians to document anything about police action because during the same time there was this huge demand for nationalism, nationalist struggle, Gandhian idea of nationalism and Nehruvian idea of nationalism. They were big. And then, of course, Sardar Patel was like one of the key figures who wanted Hyderabad to be integrated into the union government. That is one story. And then the second story is the Telangana armed struggle led by the leftist parties right between 1946 and 1951. So Marxist historians, despite their emphasis on the oppressed communities, they actually never cared for this kind of history. So they just wanted to focus more on Telangana rebellion rather than other things that were happening, just like police action or anything. And during the same time, there was a demand for separate state formation of linguistic Andhra Pradesh, Bhasha Rashtra, Telugu as a mother tongue. So in 1956, even now they just celebrated November 1st, the state formation day. So these three histories marginalized Muslim discourse and then the Muslim past. So they never touched upon any of these events or any of these struggles. So this mainstream history actually played a dominant role, is what we can call hegemonic role in the making of Muslim past. So this actually but what should we do now? We need to create alternative sources. There was some effort to look at these alternative sources, but it is not properly constructed. So we need this reconstruction of the past, remaking of the past. So in this book, I actually tried to bring these three modes of documentation. One is the historical documents, official and then unofficial, like newspapers, reportings, and then also governmental reports. Actually, Nizam actually made a huge, like a big report based on this. It was published in 1951, but this is only available in Karachi, Pakistan. This says about the Hyderabad question before the United Nations. He actually, it's like a very carefully documented, so a lot of correspondence between governments and the United Nations. This is not available elsewhere. So, and then also media reports. But my focus in the book is more about witness testimonies, like the people who lost their families because of the police action, and the people who migrated to other places. And then I juxtaposed these oral histories with literary and personal writings. So many writers in Telugu and in Urdu wrote about police action. But in the mainstream literary histories or cultural histories, we don't even see even the reference to that kind of writing, because they all felt that, okay, then we can discuss that. That's a kind of a digression, particularly in the times of nationalism, in the times of Marxian communist revolution. So in the times of Telugu state formation, that's just a digression of history. And then also, I actually collected some paintings. This is one of the paintings from the 1948, that portrays the 1948 police action. So this, like a lot of visual materials are also available. So that also needs a deep study. So why I'm using moral histories, witness narratives. And then many occasions, since I began this talk today with the comparisons between Karbala and 1948 police action, and most witnesses, they go back to Karbala and then talk about police action because they see some correlations there. And then also at the same time, this picture actually uh, Muhammad Ayub Khan Bhai actually, I got this from his private archives. So this is 1948 picture, and then this is people reading newspapers, sitting outside um, a chai shop. So that's actually a very important aspect. That's like while there was a lot of violence going on the other hand, Muslims were trying to return to normal life and then reconstruct their everyday life, despite all the disadvantages and a lot of poverty at that point among Muslims. So that particular period between 1947 and then 1950 that constructed a Hyderabadi reading public. The same movement, there was a return to ordinary Muslim as a category. So there was a protest to like talking about Nawabi Muslims rather than Nawabi Muslim because if you when they think about Muslim, Hyderabadi Muslim, the immediate reference goes to Nawabi Muslim. So they challenged that idea and then they started talking about ordinary Muslim, like Muslims living under the poverty line. So this is where the title of the book actually remaking history. It's not just about history, it's also about remaking of everyday life. In the book, I actually spoke about several organizations among Muslims and non-Muslims as well, who are actually trying to reconstruct, to remake their everyday life. So we have good evidence, about organizations such as Tamir-e-Millat, the reconstruction of Muslim community. So they started talking about education, the value of education, the value of gender reforms, the value of reading public, the value of like new class, which is actually which goes against the Nawabi category, and then which is actually in Hyderabad particularly, they started using this term new Muslim, Naya Musalman. If you remember well, late 1940s or 40s, it was also the period of industrialization in Hyderabad state. So there were a lot of cigarette factories, tobacco industry was big, and then also textile factories were big. So most Muslims, like living under the poverty line, they found like daily wage employment in these factories. So there is this rise of new Muslim class. So this is defined by the idea of class rather than religious identity. And then it's urbanity, which emphasizes the industrial life. And then at the same time, they were like participating in like progressive Muslim politics. So there was the rise of like leftist politics from the Muslims, led by particularly like I am sure you are all familiar with the great figure, poet, and then activist Maghdum Mohyuddin Sahib. So the figure of Maghdum Mohyuddin Sahib among the Muslims and then also non-Muslims was such an impressive and influential factor in the making of progressive Muslims. And then this is one of the posters about Charminar. So that shows the public face of industrial life and the changing dynamics in Hyderabad and the rise of new working class. At the same time, it was also the beginning of the generation of angry young men and women who were crying for the reforms. But the most important, because that is where my evidence comes, like the way Muslims engaged with the print publications, newspapers, and then the way they participated in the public culture. So they were active in every discipline, every field of the public culture at that point. Music, films, newspapers, and then politics. But these dimensions were never discussed, and then they were totally marginalized. So this is like one of the what we can call the way they wanted to project Muslim past as something that has no history, no cultural kind of reconstruction. They just wanted to project a Muslim past as static, while many events, historical events, many writings, and then many these aspects of political and social activism provide a different evidence that, okay, Muslim participation is huge, we can't ignore it. But my effort throughout the book or my current research is to engage with that past that was active, that was actually focusing more on the reconstruction of community, and then also the exchanges between Hindus and Muslims. Quite interestingly, in most incidents or events that might be political, cultural, or political, any other event related to Hyderabad, there was an equal participation of Hindus and Muslims. In the book, I actually got, of course, oral histories, we still have like 50% of Muslims, but written documents in literature, they come basically from non-Muslims. One big reason for this is the how Urdu language itself, and then how Muslim culture itself, Tehzeeb itself, functioned as a paradigm to understand new interactions in the making of New Hyderabad. So this is another term they were using extensively, New Hyderabad, Naya Hyderabad, particularly after the police action. If you look into the evidence coming from different activities, particularly the rise of newspapers, Urdu newspapers, siyasat actually was a product of the police action. Siyasat was also responsible at that point to create a space for discussions about Muslim identities. But quite interestingly, again, most readers for siyasat at that point, they were also non-Muslims. So why non-Muslims were so interested in reading Urdu, circulating Urdu? So this is one thing that we still need a lot of exploration. And then it's also one of the factors that helps us, because we often end up with using, when talking about Hyderabad or when Telangana state, we often end up using Telugu materials, Telugu data. That's a big disadvantage for historical studies on Hyderabad. To understand Muslim past in Hyderabad, you need to engage with Urdu materials as well. The role of Deccan Radio, some of you are familiar with this Deccan Radio, which was prominent source of media articulations at that point in late 40s. So the rise of Deccan Radio, and then participants in the Deccan Radio, they were mostly non-Muslims. This is also a very important aspect. Non-Muslims who mastered Urdu, who were writing in Urdu at that point, despite knowing Telugu, they were writing in Urdu. They started working for Deccan Radio. And then their literary careers, cultural work actually started with Deccan Radio. Deccan Radio itself is a major dimension in the making of Hyderabadi Muslim identity, reconstructing Hyderabadi Muslims. So we have this book actually like points out at many such sources. But of course, because this is one, in many ways, this is like what we can say like the one of the earliest are like works, one of the like works that actually touched upon the marginalized Muslim events in the history of Hyderabad and Deccan. Um, but what I actually could do like look like point out, give some, provide some pointers to revisit their past. And then I end with this last image. So this is a procession taken out by women, Hindu women of the Bharatiya Janata Party on the 50th year of police action in Hyderabad. It is followed by Lal Krishna Advani's public speech in Hyderabad, where he spoke about police action. The same Maidan from where Nehru spoke in 1948 when integrating Hyderabad into Indian government. Lal Krishna Advani also spoke from the same Maidan. And then he used the term policy action should be studied, should be understood as the day of Hyderabad liberation. We need to celebrate it rather than being sorrowful about it. How do you? So this is like the same idea. Official media was circulating at that point in 1948. Happy war kind of terminology. So, so the idea of liberation in Telugu, they made this word very popular, Telangana Vimochana, Hyderabad Vimukti. And then he actually made Bharatiya Janata Party workers to rewrite that Muslim past from the lens of Hindus as a liberation movement. So how is this? The big argument at that point should be how is this going to be liberation? Whose liberation is this? Whose celebration is this? How we are going to celebrate the killings of 40,000 Muslims and then some thousands of non-Muslims, and then the migration of displacement of Muslims to other parts of the world. So how do you use that terminology? So there is a return to the terminology being used in 1948, right? So our history is now, like, particularly if you are looking at the history from a different viewpoint, or if you're looking at the data which is available right now, there is no way that you can call these events happy war or liberation movement. We need to understand how Muslim community itself perceived this entire violence. And then we need to revisit those sources and then remake that history and then reconstruct the entire event from the lens of the actual numbers, not like imaginary numbers, right? So with that note, I end this talk with my favorite poet, Kashmiri poet Aga Shahid Ali's statement. My memory keeps getting in the way of our history. So this is again going back to what Vasudhara said in the beginning, like how subjectivity and the history interact, how memory and history interact. So, so of course, Aga Shahid Ali wrote about Kashmir. This line is more about Kashmir, but it's equally important for Hyderabadis. Thank you so much. Look forward to your comments and questions. And then concluding words by my good friend Ayub Ali Khan.
Thank you, Afsar Saab. And now let's listen to Ayub Khan Saab. And after that, we will go for the question answer session. Probably some of us will have some questions, and including myself. So, welcome, Ayub Saab. After your concluding remarks, we will be engaging each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Razi Saab and the Indian Diaspora Washington DC Metro for inviting me to this important talk. The talk by Dr. Afsar was very enriching and timely. The police action was a traumatic event for the people of Hyderabad. The trauma continues to linger and shape the history and politics of the region. Dr. Afsar's book carries forward the pioneering work done by Dr. Umar Khalidi on this specific episode and fills in some important gaps of scholarship by bringing together the oral narratives and the textual archive, and more importantly, the experiences in the Telugu sphere, both Hindu and Muslim. This study goes beyond the conventional focus on official histories and excavates deep into Urdu and Telugu literary text to unearth a rich archive of pain and suffering, but also of persistent hope. By paying attention to poetry and other literary texts, Afsar has demonstrated that it is not just for enjoyment and recreation, but carries within it ingredients which go into the making of a history, of a people, a region. It requires a deep engagement with the words and a skilled historian to recover it, and Afsar has proven to be a worthy historian well suited for the job. Him being a poet also helps in bringing new perspectives to the topic. Hyderabadis struggled to express their trauma, but they did, and they continue to do so in a myriad of ways, both prose and poetry. For example, the poet Hassan Farooq, who was described by the literary critic Shamsur Rahman Farooqi Sahab as one of the leading members of the new wave of Urdu poetry in the 1960s and 70s, wrote in 1972, and I quote his free rhyme poem, "Police action, क्या पुलिस एक्शन? 25 बरस मुहाफिज जिंदा, सजा तो मुझे मिली, ये भी भुगतेंगे। मुसल्लस की तीनों लकीरें, कहाँ फंस गए हो, सुनने पढ़ने वालों की फहम से, और एक रस्ते का टूटता कपकपाता पल, क्या हम बेवकूफ़ हैं? नहीं नहीं." So this poem captures the bewilderment, even after 25 years, when Hassan Farooq first wrote this, of police action, but also is expressive of the fact that the memory lingers on, and there are people writing and talking about it. Hassan Farooq had asked half a century ago where the memory of 1948 was hiding or was stuck from the thinking and the listening and the reading public. Such pain has been expressed by Afsar himself in his own poem called No Birthplace. And I quote from him, "Some limbs and organs under a vacuum head, where did I come from? None of you told me. So at 1947, why I blew up and remained broken since then." So 1947 here can as well be replaced with 1948, and both of these years are part of the long partition, as Afsar and other scholars frame it. Dr. Afsar has done an excellent job unpacking the different identities of both Hindus and Muslims. The second chapter of his book is titled "All Muslims Are Not Razakars." And conversely, he also demonstrates that not all Razakars were Muslim. There were substantial number of Hindus who were Razakars for a variety of ideological and other reasons. More interestingly, he has shown through his rich fieldwork, collecting oral histories, that there was admiration among the Hindus for the oratory of Majlis-e-Ittihadul Muslimin leader Bahaduri Arjang, even when they were opposed to his policies. Beyond this book, going beyond this, the book shows that even Hindus thought that bloodshed could have been avoided had Bahadur Jang not died prematurely at the age of 39 in 1944. Afsar Sahab discusses in much detail the metaphor of Karbala, adopted by the Muslims in remembering 1948. But I think there's another metaphor in play at that time, namely the Treaty of Hudaybiyah of the Prophets, peace be upon him. The treaty was initially considered a defeat, but God had promised the ultimate victory from such pragmatism. This pragmatism, without naming as such, or the term Hudaybiyah, has been expressed by Afsar Saab's interviews, especially Khuddus Saab. And it is well worth examining 1948 from this perspective as well. The book opens up new avenues and innovative strategies should be adopted by future scholars. One thing I noticed was that the book doesn't discuss 1948 as part of a larger series of tragedies which beset Hyderabad. There is an underlying narrative in both Muslim and Hindu sources tracing 1948 back to the fall of Golconda in 1687. Even Khalilullah Hussaini, the founder of the reformist Majlis-e Tamir-e-Millat, which Professor Afsar talks about in his book. So Khalilullah Hussaini adopts this approach in his speeches and writings. For instance, the heroes of Hyderabad for Khalilullah Hussaini are people like Abdul Razak Lari, the defender of Golconda, and not some Mughal warrior or commander. So I think some attention should be paid to this. And more importantly, the month of September is particularly considered by Hyderabadis as the harbinger of tragedies, and they often call it Sitamgar or cruel. This is captured evocatively in a writing of the communist leader Raj Bahadur Gaud, and I quote from him in Urdu. He writes, हम हैदराबादियों ने माह सितंबर को सितमगर का नाम यूं ही नहीं दिया. कोई साल ऐसा नहीं जाता कि इस सितंबर ने हम पर सितम न ढाए हो. कभी तुगयानी आई, कभी पुलिस एक्शन, कभी नदी पर पुल टूटा और रेलगाड़ी मुसाफिरों समेत बह गई, कभी तालाब का बंद टूटा और देहात के देहात गर्काब हो गए. सितमगर सितम बरदोश ही आता है. So I think it will be helpful if we connect 1948 with the floods in the Musi River of 1908 and other tragedies going all the way back to the fall of Golconda in 1687. Afsar Saab's chapter 4 looks at the role of Urdu post 1948 and finds it to be a source of progressive change in the city and elsewhere. I would argue that there was no single Urdu reading public. The Urdu reading public was very diverse, with the Orthodox Hyderabad Deccan, the Jamaat-e-Islami inspired Daily Sadaqat, and many others. Even the right-wing Hindu nationalist opinion had a mouthpiece in the Urdu Milap, which was published until 2000 in Urdu from Hyderabad, and it is still published in Urdu from Delhi. So I think there was a wider and more diverse Urdu reading public, encapsulating a variety of opinions and ideologies, and we should work on that as well. So I think my time is up. In conclusion, this book is a courageous and methodologically innovative work, which needs to be widely read. It brings history alive and demonstrates its relevance and importance in the contemporary context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yusuf, and thank you all three speakers. Before we go to question and answer session, here is coming Saturday's talk. Dr. Nazima Parveen from Delhi is going to give a talk on contested homelands, the making of Hindu-Muslim geographies in colonial North India. It's a very interesting topic that could lead to our imagination of modern-day mohallas in Indian subcontinent especially in India, why we have Hindu mohallas, Muslim mohallas, and a mixed mohalla. Probably we were always living like that since hundreds of years, and there must be some reason. So just wait for coming Saturday. She will be introduced by Professor Amibullah Khan Sahab, who is a former civil servant and a professor in one of the universities in Deccan. And the concluding remarks will be given by Professor David Gilmartin, a professor in North Carolina State University, professor of history. So stay tuned to that. And now the session is going to be moderated by Dr. Rafat Hussain for question and answer session. Rafat.
Thank you, Dr. Raziuddin. The session is open for question and answer. You can raise your digital hand or you show your interest in the chat box. And before we begin the question and answer session, I'd like to thank all the speakers, especially Afsar Mohammad Khan, an introduction by Ayub Khan. And so let's begin the question and answer session. Let's see if anyone has raised the hand. Of course, there are many. And thank you. The first one is Muhammad Akbar from Hyderabad. Muhammad
From Washington, D.C.
Akbar, please go ahead and...
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. It was a nice presentation, Afsar Sahab. But I am surprised, but in your presentation, you have not taken name of Razakar movement in your talk. Secondly, the migration, what you have pointed out regarding people migrating to USA is completely different at the time of what you presented and when they people migrated to Canada or, I mean, Chicago or other places. That was in 80s, late 80s, I can say. And the one which you are talking about is 48. So what is the correlation, how you correlate those two migrations? And also you didn't mention anything about Razakars, but I think Mr. Ayub Khan has taken few times the name of Razakars, but not in your presentation. I didn't see any of that.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. Go ahead, Afsar Sahab.
Shukriya Bhai Sahab, thank you for pointing it out. Because there is an exclusive, Ayub Bhai also mentioned that there is an exclusive chapter in the book on Razakars. So but today I couldn't talk much about it because I was looking at the broader picture of the politics of police action. I didn't get into that specifics, right? So that is one reason. And then the question about migration is also very important. Yeah, there are two migrations. But one migration, what I heard from my Chicago friends, they were that migration was not immediately after the police action because they were in Hyderabad state during that police action. They were actually children, right? And then when their parents moved to USA, maybe Canada or like Pakistan, so that is actually the first migration.
Yeah.
So, and then of course in the 80s, this is like a global kind of phenomenon of migration, right?
Yeah, that was complete.
Yeah. So we actually need to understand these different waves of migration. But in 1980s, second wave of migration, you don't have the big influence of police action or related
Exactly.
events.
Right.
But previous migration, police action was a huge influence.
Right.
Because they came to these places with the scars on their mind, and then they were still remembering from their parents, of course. When I gave book talks in Los Angeles and then Chicago and other places, there were actually a big number of Hyderabadi Muslims in the audience. So they were talking about how in 1948 they were just children, and then they were actually being like their parents and grandparents, how they were talking about it, and then there's just their memory is not direct memory of police action. It's an indirect memory.
Right.
Even for the first wave of migrants.
Yeah.
But I believe there is a lot of work to be done. Also, the question about Razakar, because that's my new work. I'm
Okay.
looking at how the Muslim representations are working in different narratives, including media narratives. I actually want to talk about this recent movie Razakar as well, which actually such a wrongful,
Yeah.
falsified representation of Muslims.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, thank you so much for the response and the
Yeah.
questions.
Thank you so much. It's a nice
Thank you so
presentation.
much.
Razi Saab, Rafa Saab, can I quickly add one thing on the
Mhm.
migration to the US?
Please go ahead.
There is actually I'm working on this, and there is actually a rich archive of early migrants and refugees in 1948 itself of Hyderabadis
Right.
applying for asylum in America. So I have
Mhm.
found at least
Right.
15 such cases. So even before the
Right.
mass migration, there has been a refugee community going
Mhm.
back to 1948, and there were pretty prominent people in them as well.
Right.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so the next, okay, sorry about that. My sincere apologies that I forgot to acknowledge Dr. Vasundhara Roy for the introductory remark. So thank you once again. And let's begin with the Zainul Abidin Sayyed.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Sorry.
Alaikum salam.
So, excellent talk. Thank you so much. And thanks for the organizers for doing this. That's really helpful. So I have two comments and two quick questions. I'll be very quick. So one question, I think Akbar I mentioned the role of Razakars. In the other way to see it as during your research, what was the perceived injustice Hindus at that time felt and how it changed? And a nuance to that is there were two. I'm from Hyderabad, so the perceived injustices were mostly from the peasants, mostly from the ruling class Hindus who were like Raos and Reddys,
Right.
whereas the peasants had very
Right.
different. So that's one kind of question I wanted you to illustrate a little bit. And the second question I had was one of the prominent non-Muslim at the time was Sarojini Naidu, who extensively spoke in poetry and prose. And I wanted to know if something came up during your research. There were two questions.
Thank you.
And you mentioned about Urdu read by not of non-Muslims. So it has a little bit also nuanced history because P.V. Narasimha Rao, the late prime minister, he was really unhappy that it was imposed in as a medium of instruction for medicine, engineering, and law. Also, he also complained about having a Sherwani as a dress code at the time. So there were two
Right.
comments. And one thing you mentioned about refugees, I just was collecting. There was Dr. Hamidullah from Hyderabad, who was the head of the Department for Law at the time. And he represented the delegation from Hyderabad. So there is also extensive work from him. I just wanted to know your thoughts about him. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. This is good. What is the second question? Could you repeat it?
So that was the Sarojini Naidu.
Ah,
Like he wrote extensively that time, vocally. I mean, she was very open about it, the perceived injustice and all the representation in Indian Muslims, how it was really affecting Hyderabadi community at that time.
right. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Those are like really good questions. About the Razakars, actually, I see some comments here on chat as well. Yes, there is so much to be done there. But one thing that I noticed, even from my witness narratives and then other documents, including literary and non-literary, and then also media reports, Razakars means it's not just Muslims, right? At that point, Razakars, upper caste, Hindu landlords, Reddys, Valamas were part of these Razakars. Actually, to be honest, they took big advantage of the Razakar activism, militarism, rather than Muslims. Muslims were blamed, that's it. So while the entire benefit goes to upper caste, upper class landlords. So this is something we need to study, particularly about is a part of rise of industrial class, working class in Hyderabad. While most Muslims, like the one novel that I discussed in this context is My Garib Hum. So how Muslims were living under the poverty line, and then how that Garibi actually like a big aspect of Muslim life at that point. While most Muslims were portrayed as Razakars or Nawabs, right? Which was not true. It's so it's just a regular like what we can call like a demonization of Muslim community. That's it. But one thing actually Ayub Bhai knows this better than me, since he's working on Bahadur Jung. So we also need to understand there are two waves of Razakar Act militarism. One is during Bahadur Jung, and then second wave comes with Qasim Rizvi, right? These two waves are totally different from one another. While Bahadur Jung was focusing more on the reconstruction of Muslim community, for Qasim Rizvi, that was not even an agenda. His agenda was just to like it's just I see, of course, there are now different viewpoints, but what I take from my witness narratives and my documents is that his agenda at that point was nothing to do with Muslim community. More than that, it affected Muslim community in a very negative way.
He fled, as we know, right? I mean, he fled to Pakistan.
Right. So this is where actually Zainuddin Bhai, we need to have a careful understanding of Muslim past.
Yeah.
Who is speaking for whom? So what is the role of Bahadur Jung, and then how it is different from Qasim Rizvi? And then even within the bureaucracy and then governmental like politics in Hyderabad state, sometimes, not most times, not sometimes, most times Qasim Rizvi was going against even Nizam, right? So there was
He was
no
hugely, massively. Yes.
synchronization of Nizam's rule and then Qasim Rizvi's agenda. And then on the other hand, he was like, so if you look into the Razakar narrative stories, most Razakars, this upper class, upper caste, landlordism, that actually defined the agenda of Razakars at that point. I believe maybe my next work is going to has so much to say about this dimension. Thank you for those questions.
Thank you so much.
And then also Naidu, Sarojini Naidu and other figures. Yes, of course, there were some liberals at that point because Sarojini Naidu was a big beneficiary of Nizam government, right? And a lot of other like uh, people from other parts of the India, like North India. So all these issues about like migrations from North India to Hyderabad, and then Sarojini Naidu's role. Of course, she very powerfully articulated some of the aspects of Hyderabadi Muslim life or Hyderabadi life itself. But I see her as more as a Congress person rather than a pro-Muslim person. So there is a difference, right, in Congress perspective and then Muslim perspective.
Thank you so much. And let's move on to the next question. Dr. Saizadi. Okay. The next is Dr. Nazir Ahmed.
Salam, namaste, adab. Thank you, Afsar Saab, for a very erudite lecture. Two very brief comments from an old-timer for whom the events of partition and police action are not history but living memory. And the first one is the context. The context is the failure of Muslim intelligentsia to articulate a vision of Islam in a non-Muslim matrix.
Right.
The only effort that was made was by Allama Iqbal, 3031. It has its own inconsistencies.
Right,
I'm not
right,
going to go into. That's number one.
right,
The
right.
second one, the events of September 1948, they did not happen in a vacuum.
Right,
Even
right.
before then, the partition had already happened. The massacres in Punjab were behind us, but were still going on. Junagadh was behind us. In September of 47, Patel made an effort to trade Hyderabad for Kashmir. That was rejected. In November that year, thanks to Mountbatten, an offer was made to give special status to Hyderabad. That was also rejected. And the police action happened the day after Jinnah died. These things have to be remembered. Now, my question relates to, you have so eloquently talked about displacement and migration. But one area of displaced migration was the displacement migration from the neighboring areas of the erstwhile Hyderabad state into Hyderabad. Prior to 1948, there were a large number of people who moved to Mysore. I know personally many people sold everything, moved to Hyderabad, thinking that it was so-called Junubi Pakistan, and came back having lost everything else.
Right.
My question is, have you looked into it, that displacement from the old Mysore state, Bombay state, Madras state into Hyderabad? Because most of the killings happen, as you rightly pointed out,
Right.
not in Hyderabad,
Right.
but in the outlying areas.
Right. Right.
There are
Right,
many
right.
other aspects of it too, but sir, if you would please throw some light on that aspect of migration, would appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really very insightful comment, and the questions are really very important when looking at the history. So one thing is, yes, I totally agree. There is a failure of Muslim intelligentsia. But one thing we also need to note that there was also a lot of Muslim intellectual history starting 1940s. And then there are a lot of, even before that, there was a movement like about gender reconstruction, gender revolution. Like there were like newspapers published exclusively for like gender equality, right? So, and then there were a lot of Urdu journalists, reformists working for this like mission. And then girls' education became like a very prominent aspect between 1900 and then 1947. But only blockade was police action. After police action, we lost that connection with the history, previous history, history related to community, history related to gender equality, history related to educational benefits. So those three aspects remain like totally ignored because we were focusing highly on like other aspects of history like Telangana rebellion. That is one thing. But we still have to study Muslim intellectual history at a broader level. Like how do we understand these all these Muslim colleges, educational institutions in Hyderabad, and what is their role in girls' education, Muslim girls' education, right? So that is one thing. And the second aspect, of course, it's not the police action. No, didn't happen in a vacuum. There are a lot of history, but the way they projected, the official history is projected it as just a part of like limited history, right? While we have this all these examples that you brought, like Junagadh, and then there are a lot of like incidents at that point. And the migration aspect, actually, in the book, I spoke about migration within Hyderabad state. So a lot of Muslims, non-Muslims too, they migrated to Hyderabad city, started living there because the urbanity of Hyderabad life provided some benefit for them, right? They can live like incognito there, right? And then there's these migrations, they are not documented properly. So I actually like along with the intellectual history and then the migrations within Hyderabad state, actually they go together. A lot of people who migrated to Hyderabad city at that point, they were Muslim, non-Muslim intellectuals inspired by Islamic cultures and Urdu language, literary cultures. So I think there is so much to unpack there as far as Hyderabad history itself is concerned. Of course, there was no incident. I would not say there were no incidents in Hyderabad city, but there might be incidents because most incidents happened in Medak, Nalgonda, Khammam, Karimnagar, these places, Nizamabad. But the people migrated from those places to Hyderabad city. And then there were also incidents. The picture I was showing in the beginning of this talk, that's actually from Hyderabad, the army invading the city, right? So that shows the impact of police action within the city, right? Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope this helps.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next one is Muhammad Ali Putur, please.
Abhay Rafat, I'm in the line too.
Okay, you dropped. Okay, go ahead, please. Hold on, Muhammad Ali Saab. Hold on for a second. Go
Okay,
ahead.
sure.
My question is, of course, the police action is, we talk a lot about it, but Hyderabadi culture, pre-1948, post-48, and now, what I heard and you very explain it to, it was related mostly to Karbala, Imam Hussein, and all those aspects. What changes you noticed in those three stages? And that was not only Hyderabad, it was in Lucknow and Rampur and many other places. Can you comment?
Right. So thank you for that. So Karbala was just one aspect, Muhammad Ali Saab. It's not the entire thing. Because particularly that year came, the return to Karbala idea came when Bahadur Yar Jang was killed, right? So, and then my witness narratives, they often referred to the contributions made by Bahadur Yar Jang. So they were talking about if there were Bahadur Yar Jang at that point in 1948, that must be totally different situation. So that was just like some like subjective kind of situation, right? And then they were that's just a mention about Karbala and then Husseini at that point. Why? It's also like it's a minor reference, but earlier we had a discussion about Muslim intelligentsia and the leadership. So, but that we need to understand that reference to Karbala when you talk about Muslim intellectual histories. So why Bahadur Yar Jang was back into discourse? That's one question. And then what made people look back into the remote history? History of Karbala was kind of remote history, right? So we need to understand the correlations. To that extent, Karbala was relevant for them. And then even in post 1948, during 1998, this Hindutva shift, there was again a return to Karbala. Actually, they were using this term in Telugu folk culture. There is a term Tarikh Katha. Tarikh they took from Farsi means history, and Katha is story, Telugu. So historical narrative, historical story, how history should be retold, what aspects of history should be narrated. So that was the point when they are referring to that word. But Tarikh Katha, historical story, even now being used particularly in the context of Karbala. So during Muharram, 10 days of Muharram, they retell the events of Karbala. For that genre, they use Tarikh Katha. So this is all, there are like different phases of return to Karbala within this history. And then this is something to do with larger aspects of Islam and then Muslim community, like as we like leadership issues, identity issues, and the conflicts with Hindutva. And then also you were mentioning about partition earlier, someone like mentioning about partition. Um, Partition was also not properly documented within this history, right? So there is also it took a lot of time to return to the incidents related to partition as well, right? So that movement came very late, but in around 1948, immediately after police action, what I see there is there is an awakening among Muslims of Hyderabad. So many things happening between 1948 and 50, which go against the mainstream history, right? So there is a return to pre-1948 history, when in 1940 they started talking about Muslim state. It's not don't confuse that with Islamic State. They were talking about Muslim state particularly. That idea like later borrowed from Jinnah's perspective on Pakistan. So Jinnah at that point was also important
Thank
figure in the
thank you,
making of
Dr.
this.
Saab. May I
Yeah,
request you to
thank you.
please be brief in your response? There are many people are lined up. So,
Right.
and we will be short of time in the end. Mohammad Ali
Sure.
Patur Saab, please be ask a pointed question, no background, nothing. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Afsar Mohammad, for your fantastic presentation. I'm actually not neither nor from the North America, neither I am from Hyderabad. I'm actually from Kerala, but doing my my research on AI/MIM basically from Berlin, and I'm working on MIM and Muslim politics in Hyderabad since 1920s. Since you talked about the reconstruction of the history and Muslim life after the police action and the role of public, including Tamir Millet, Siyasat, and everything, my question is very simple. When I look at this post-police action time and the efforts of Muslims from different backgrounds, I see a competing vision for the reconstruction of Muslim life in the post-colonial Hyderabad. And for example, Siyasat, when we read the editorials of Siyasat at that time, we see almost siding with the Congress vision, saying that don't get into politics, but just stay away from the politics in terms of creating a party or doing all those of things, and focus more on the socio-economic empowerment of the Muslims, which was Tamir Millet doing as well. But then you see, when you look at AIMIM from 58 onwards, they're coming back with another competing vision of this. And since your book is more on the reconstruction of this, focusing on the reconstruction of the life, I would like to know about your take on this another competing vision from the other side, which is Abdul Wahid Owaisi and MIM.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohammad Ali sir.
That's a good question. Yeah, that's Majlis politics. I actually spoke about Majlis politics briefly in the context when Bahadur Arjang and Hasim Rizvi were mentioned in the book. But there is actually a PhD from University of Chicago about Majlis politics, which I think you should also read again.
You mentioned Shafali Jah for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. She did a wonderful job with that aspect. For me, it's just a political question. It's not about Muslim identity question. So that is where you see disjuncture between Muslim identity and Majlis politics, right? So sometimes Majlis politics are like totally against Muslim identity discourse, right? So we actually need to understand this as like a regular political matter rather than connected to Muslims. So I see even ordinary Muslims in Hyderabad, they also see Majlis in a similar way, right? So, but I actually like don't want to get into that complicated question right now. We don't have much time here, but I just want to make a clear distinction here between Muslim identity debates and then Majlis politics. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next person is by the name user. Please go ahead. Hello.
Hello, yeah.
Please. Identify yourself, please. Okay, we will come back to user. Next is a Zoom user by the name. Please unmute yourself. I ask you to unmute. Go ahead. Hello. Okay, we will come back to Zoom user also.
I unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we could.
Okay, thank you very much for taking. Thanks a lot for the lot of information we got. We know that I'm from Hyderabad. I'm Dr. Mohiuddin, living in Frederick, Maryland. So I stood a
I
personality.
don't think I can hear it because there's a lot of noise there.
Okay. I stood the personality of the Nizam, how he ruled, and that is very famous in Hyderabad. And they say that once the viceroy came to visit him, and during his talk, he did mention, "You are ruling Hyderabad."
We missed you, Dr. Saab.
Yeah, I think we lost it.
Dr. Saab.
I couldn't get it totally. Yes.
Okay, he was Dr. Mohiuddin from.
Right.
Okay, so we will.
Muslim are like eyes. How can you say the right one is better than? So I just wanted to say his phrase. Which was very famous and everybody knows about it. I thought that I share with you. Thank you.
I think that was the comment, Afsar Saab.
Yeah, it's for just.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Muhyiddin Saab. Mr. Rajaullah Qureshi, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Assalamu alaikum.
We can.
Yeah. I'm from India originally. I've been almost here 6 decades in Chicago area, Illinois. My question is, why you compare this to Karbala? I don't see I could find a lot more better examples to compare, because in Karbala, it was one group of Muslims against another group, and they had different political understandings and so on, conflict. But here it's a military action by a sovereign government of India over a sovereign government of Hyderabad, which was legitimately Nizam's until he concedes, because the Britishers, when they left, they had given this choice to the ruler, just like the Kashmir ruler opted under whatever duress to join India. So before he could make up his mind, taking action, to me it is similar to Goa action in 1955 or 56. So can you explain why you picked Karbala and not others similar cases where against government?
No, I myself have a lot of questions about that, but that is coming from my witness narratives. So those people, they were repeatedly using that idea, but I know the internal aspects of Karbala, and there are like complications, implications when you use similar idea in the case of Hyderabad. But that was also, if you look into Bahadur Jang's life story, and then other like Muslim intellectuals in the mid 40s, see some references to Karbala there as well. So those references are symbolic references, nothing to do with what was happening in Karbala at that point or what's happening in Hyderabad at this moment. But the commonality is the fight for equality, the fight for social justice, the fight against hierarchy. So those are like very broad commonalities.
No,
So to that extent,
yeah,
we can like compare,
yeah. No, my concern is
correlate some of
particularly
these things. But again, this is not my proposition,
no,
Razal Masab. It is coming
only very
from
briefly.
my witnesses.
Briefly, my concern is, and the current circumstances and the climate there, the Hindutva government will say, "Wow, the Muslims did to Muslims. So what's wrong with it to the again?"
Right.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Razal.
Point well taken. Razibhai, you want to ask a question now or in the end?
So there is one Sayyid Hussain Sahab.
Yeah, I know Sayyid Hussain Sahab, but
yeah,
go ahead. We will invite Sayyid
Afsar
Yeah.
Sahab, I have a lot of actually reservations on. I usually don't open up because I invite speakers, so I avoid. The way you presented, you sounded like you are putting a case where an Indian state army is just simply killing Muslims. That's the impression that you gave, and that's why you see the very first question comes from Dr. Akbar, that you simply forgot Qasim Rizvi's acts and misdeeds, Razakar's chief misdeed.
Right.
I can show you right here thousands of articles written on the campaign of murder and things that he was doing, and you keep on also bringing that look sort of justification that look in his Razakar's army there were upper caste Hindus, as if you are putting that both are together doing this. That's not the reality. There were some loyalist Hindus there. There are always loyalist, in Sirajuddaullah's Fauj also, there were some loyalist Angrez or Hindus. So what is the, you want to do this thing? Indian army is nothing to do with like killing for Muslims. They were consolidating, Indian state was consolidating all princely in every state. Nizam was adamant, they declared independent state within the Union of India. Obviously, Indian Union will not tolerate it, just like it didn't tolerate Kashmir or XY, Rajasthan and other princes. So taking it as a Muslim versus Indian state, which silently means Hindus, this is a wrong implication without saying what Razakars were doing. They were butchering Hindus actually in the villages. Why did not you say this thing? Second thing, as Rajaullah Sahib said, saying anything referring Karbala for all Muslims, regardless of Shia and Sunni, is very sensitive topic. It is about Imam Hussein and the tragedy of Karbala. Zero absolutely to do with what happens in Hyderabad. It is a adamant of the whole thing is like, I have a kingdom, I want to secure it no matter what. And the Indian Union is bent upon, no, you cannot have this thing anymore. So then putting all this thing into a book and putting a case without giving a justified reason of how this thing happened. History is full and apparent, written by all sort of people about Hyderabad police action. And before that, as Dr. Nazir said, that it didn't happen in vacuum. I'm just making these comments that I please review or revise certain things into that. If it is not part of your book, that's fine. But if it is going to be in your talks elsewhere, please revise this talk in that way, which
Sure.
sounds like, suddenly you come up with 40,000 Muslims were killed by Indian army. This is something which is not to be taken so easily, even by me. I mean Muslim, right? But that should not be the case. You have to objectively put it. What happened? Why and what was the reaction? Before that, how many within the Nizam territory, how many got killed? Who were killing whom? And you are talking about Bahadur Jung, who already died. It is just like Tojo, Prime Minister Tojo in Japan, butchering everyone, and Emperor of Japan is pleading. So if you are saying that Nizam was pleading, it was Nizam who ordered him. It was Nizam who clearly ordered Qasim Rizvi to go and butcher people. What?
Okay, so yes, point well taken. We will.
Well, sorry for all that, but one has to be a little bit more clear about talking about history.
We will come back after your questions are over, and then we will give a chance to Afsar Saab to say something. Thank you so much. Sayyid Hussain Saab.
हैदराबादी ट्रेडिशन में मैं आपको सबसे पहले आधा वर्ष कहता हूँ। एक दूसरी बात जो मैं कहना चाह रहा था वो ये है कि हैदराबाद की जो हिस्ट्री बयान की गई है, माशाल्लाह, दैट्स ए वेरी वेल डन एंड आई कमेंड अफसर साहब फॉर दैट।
Thank you.
But I have one question, that the period between 1948 and 1957 was a very critical period for Hyderabad. That was the post-police action period in which the Muslims as well as the Hindus of Hyderabad were trying to adjust themselves. And the Ganga Jamna Tehzeeb used to be there before, and there are plenty of examples to give for that. That Tehzeeb was kind of confused, and the new Hyderabad, which was emerging in that period between 1948 and 1957, has there been any work very clearly done? And what was the thought processes, how they managed to come out? And today's Hyderabad seems to be an outcome of that thinking at the time. I would like to know if there has been any work done on that.
Right. So thank you. That's really good. Thank you so much for your comments and the question. There is, it's not a simple story to be able to narrate now, because it's a long history between 1948 and then recent developments. But I want to emphasize that there is, in mainstream history, high privilege is being given to nationalist perspective. So some of these like ideas come from Congress perspective, Congress political perspective, and then nationalism. And the idea of integration into union government, of course, there are a lot of implications there, complexities there. And then we totally understand the adamant attitude of Nizam. But the question is not about Nizam or the union government to that extent. It is the question about the killings, right? We clearly have Sundarlal Committee's report that documented the entire killings. But I am also going to say that it's not just Muslims. I repeatedly said that in my talk. It's not just Muslims. It's also Hindus and Christians. So we need to understand, like, even to that extent, I also contest what Sundarlal Committee said. It's not just Muslims. And then there are other aspects like Razakar aspect and then other aspects too. There are like, but we still have to understand carefully what happened in the name of Razakars in the history of Hyderabad. So most things, they are attributed to Muslims, not to the Razakars, in the name of Razakar, right? So that history should be explored. And then other things like post 1948 developments, the resilience that the community articulated, displayed, demonstrated around 1948. That is clearly, this is like the picture that shows clearly what they were doing, Muslims were doing, how they are Tamir-e-Millat. There is several references to Tamir-e-Millat during this session. And there are several references to siyasat. So we need to, and then Muslim education, right? So there are so many dimensions, like how Muslims survived, not just survived, but they also created, constructed their life from the scratch. So that still we need to explore. Thank you so much for those comments.
Thank you, Afsar Saab. Abdul Jabbar Saab posted some of the articles there.
Jabbar Saab, Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. So I'm from Tamil Nadu. Finally, I'm glad there's a discussion, history discussion came down to the south from the north. That way I'm happy. So the kind of it's a lot of unpack a lot of information for me in terms of educating myself about the history of Hyderabad and the Deccan stuff. So I read quite a bit nowadays. I came to the US 44 years ago. So you mentioned, I think always growing up in Tamil Nadu, in a small southern part of Tamil Nadu, we used to think about, we used to read about Naxalite movement in Hyderabad, in the Andhra. So that is very foreign to Tamil Nadu in terms of. So you did mention briefly about that in your presentation. What is the milieu? What is that? Why there's an Naxalite communist movement in that part of the region? It's a social justice movement or some sort of religious connotations to it. So that's what I just wanted to. I just focused on that a very minute part of your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jabbar Saab. It's a very important question as well. Like why Telangana rebellion happened only in Hyderabad state, not elsewhere. While the issues, we still have similar issues in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Kerala, right? But in the case of Hyderabad state, there were two things there. One is the history of Hyderabad state is quite different from the history of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka. Earlier, there was some mention about Mysore state as well. But and then history of Hyderabad state is different, particularly because of Nizam's history. And then the rise of Communist Party in Telangana was phenomenal. It's not the same in other parts of the South India, right? So and then also, since Nizam promoted upper caste landlordism, then communists grabbed that opportunity to fight against feudal system. So that's one. In many ways, that's a movement for socialism. Social justice. And then there were equally Muslims and Hindus in that particular historical movement. It's an internationally acknowledged political movement. Actually, in 1952 elections, there was it was assumed that communists are going to take over the state. Nehru was worried about it. The heart of Hyderabad state Hyderabad state was like a heart of country, right? So if the heart goes, that would be like bad for. That was Nehru's concern and worry, and then he deliberately suppressed Telangana rebellion and then used police action as a tool to suppress them. So there is an interconnected history between national politics and then local politics here. This is something different from other states, South Indian states. And also to that extent, there are a lot of studies about Telangana rebellion. But Telangana rebellion as related to Muslims, it's not studied properly.
But Afsar Saab,
yeah.
Thank you.
That was a context of 1948 when it is a sort of considered for communists imperial state in front, they were confronting Nizam's imperial state.
Right.
Obviously, communist movement or Telangana movement was there for justified reason.
Right.
Nehru's fear for a communist rebellion within a new India obviously was also a justified thing, but it's the same Congress who gave Telangana state bifurcating Andhra.
Right.
Well, Makhdum Mayuddin, the poet, was the most prominent figure of that Telangana movement.
Right.
Razi Saab, can I, and with your permission, Rafat Saab, can I make a brief comment or maybe towards the end? Because I think there is some misunderstanding here, which I would like to clarify. I can wait until the end or...
Please go ahead. That would be the last comment.
Okay. Thank you, Rafat Saab. So I think there is some misunderstanding. Professor Afsar never, in his book, he doesn't justify the Razakar atrocities post 1948. He is just looking at 48 violence, post 48, but his focus is on that. But in his book, there is also a discussion about what happened prior to 1948. And in no way is he accusing the Indian army of committing these atrocities, but he's just putting the violence which followed after the military invasion in the proper context. So I would like to read one paragraph from the Sundarlal Committee report. I'm working on an annotated edition of this book. It's coming out very soon. So with your permission, I would like to quote this. He talks about some instances of Indian army soldiers indulging in violence and loot. But then he also says, lest we might be understood to imply a slur on the Indian army, we hasten to record our considered opinion that the Indian army and its officers in Hyderabad generally maintained a high standard of discipline and sense of duty. In General Chaudhry, we found a man without any tinge of communal prejudice. He's a firm disciplinarian and thorough gentleman. So when Afsar Saab talks about anti-Muslim violence in the wake of the army invasion, he's not implicating the army itself. It was done by a variety of folks. There are a lot of members of Hindu Mahasabha and Arya Samaj and other militant groups who crossed over into Hyderabad. They carried out a lot of violence, and also there were local actors who can be implicated in that violence. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Ayub Saab, for the clarification. Thank you so much. That was the last comment, but I see one of my seniors, Sayyid Ahmed Saab, has raised hand, and that would be the last one. I can assure you that would be the last one.
Thank you for your indulgence, Rafat. And I enjoyed the talk. I am not from Hyderabad. In fact, I've never been to Hyderabad. And whatever little knowledge I have is just by reading about it. The more interesting information I had is from reading the book of Nawab Saab Chatari, Yad-e-Ayyam, who was the last, not the last, because Mir Layak Ali was the final chief minister, but Nawab Chatari was the Sadr Muhammad, or whatever they call the chief minister, during the last days of negotiations between Government of India and Nizam. One thing I did not see, but I am disadvantaged because I have not read your book, so maybe you have dealt with it, the role of Nizam in there. It seems that towards the end, he was living in his own world. In fact, the whole society of Hyderabad was living in his own world. When Mountbatten was still the Governor General of India, India had become independent. And Nizam was trying to negotiate first that he should be giving the title of His Majesty. And then he said the title is not given. It is something which nobody can give it to you. You just, either you are His Majesty or not. The second thing, he was living in a dream, pipe dream, that Barar will be given to him and as a ruler of Hyderabad. So it seemed that, and you might have dealt with it, there seemed that an air of unrealism was prevailing before Hyderabad police action was taken. And some of the information also I found very interesting in the memoirs of K. Munshi, who was the Agent General of the Governor General And he writes quite extensively about the role of Sardar Patel in the annexation. So I'm not sure it's much any question in there, but just a general observation. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that concludes the question and answer session. Thank you, everyone, for attending the session. And of course, our brilliant speakers, Dr. Afsar Mohammad, Dr. Basundhara Roy, and Dr. Ayub Khan Saab. Thank you so much, and we appreciate your attendance.
Perfect. At 1. I had never finished at 1, always. So this is perfect.
But it was an interesting.
Yeah, scored 100%.
For Hyderabadis were excited.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the time and patience.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, comments and responses.
All the best for your book.
Let us continue the conversation
Sure.
later. Okay.
जाइए आमिर भाई एक बार दक्कन भी हो आइए
जी
आइए हैदराबाद एक बार
सहरे दक्कन
It's not the legendary Hyderabad.
पहले
It's not the Hyderabad of those years you are thinking about, and unlikely. But I enjoyed the talks about Hyderabad and any history about Hyderabad and Nizam and all that. I know a lot of people from Hyderabad, excellent people.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it.
Amir Saab, where are you from?
Actually, I was born in UP, Uttar Pradesh, Badaयूं. But then I migrated to Pakistan, and for the longest time, we've been living in the United States. But you know, where you are born or you grew up, you never lost your roots. I mean, you
in between, in UK.
यहाँ पे ठहर गए हैं तो ये लेकिन आपने बदायूं तक गए मौजे में नहीं गए जबकि आपका सबसे डियर जो चीज है वो आपका मौजा है उसके बाद बदायूं आता है
मैं इसलिए नहीं कहता कि सहसवान तो छोटा कस्बा था
बात पूरी नहीं होती
सहसवान तो छोटा कस्बा था लोग जानते
तो भी है लेकिन सहसवान से आपकी
अच्छा खासा मशहूर
रूट जो है ना वो सहसवान से शुरू हो रहा है
वो सही है वो 500 साल तक my family lived in Saswan. All my ancestors are buried in Saswan, so but Badaयूं more familiar to people, so it is easier to introduce.
Yeah.
अलीगढ़ वालों के लिए सहसवान बहुत फेमस है काफी लोग वहां से रहते हैं हमेशा सहसवान रहता है
थैंक यू
अफसर साहब यू आर
बहुत शुक्रिया
हाँ मैं ये कहना चाह रहा था अफसर साहब से आप अफसर साहब कहाँ से हैं आप
यहाँ अमेरिका में
नहीं अमेरिका में तो पेंसिल्वेनिया से लेकिन नहीं हैदराबाद में तो तेलंगाना से हैं आंध्र से
खम्बम से मैं
खम्बम से हैं आप अच्छा ओके
लेकिन पढ़ाई हैदराबाद में हुई थी
अच्छा राइट
वो अकबर समझ गए थे कि आप कहाँ से हैं लेकिन वो
बिल्कुल
रजी साहब मैं सुना कि आपके प्रोग्राम के बाद जो है मुशायरा भी होता है तो मैं उसका
मुशायरा करेंगे
रजी भाई
अच्छा भाई शुक्रिया एंड देन खुदा हाफिज
थैंक यू सो मच थैंक
यू एक्सक्यूज अफसर साहब दिस इज अ चिट चैट सेशन कंटिन्यू फॉर अ फ्यू मिनट्स
जी आप जा सकते
हैं because it has been more than 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
please. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, let's finish, Razi bhai.
Okay. Khuda Hafiz to everyone.
So, Razi Saab, I compiled a book on 1948 from various perspectives, from the Dalit and communist, Muslim, all kinds of feminist perspectives. It's a compilation of articles by about 20 people, including a 12-year-old who was witness to some of the violence, and then he migrated to Chicago. So I'll share a copy with you. You can take a look. Basically presenting police action from multiple perspectives.
So is there any way जो जैसे within even Muslim community भी उस time there were strong emotions against dismembering Nizam's whole legacy, जैसे जिसको कहते हैं मखदूम मोहिद्दीन and others who were leftists. सो इसको इस रंग में हमेशा पेश करना चाहिए। यानी अगर कभी देखा जाए कि भाई हैदराबाद एक नए जमाने में जमहूरियत आ रही है, इंटीग्रेशन हो रहा है, तो ये किंगडम क्यों रह रही है? एक तो ये है, इसमें दोनों शामिल हो सकते हैं, मुस्लिम्स एंड हिंदूज। ऑब्वियसली एक मुस्लिम किंगडम है तो माइनॉरिटी में पॉपुलेशन के बावजूद भी मुस्लिम्स का अपर हैंड होगा, इट इज ऑब्वियस। हिंदू किंगडम है तो हिंदूज का होगा किंगडम्स में, नॉट इन जनरल। तो वो पर्सपेक्टिव लोगों को दिखाना चाहिए कि व्हेन हैदराबाद स्टेट वाज इन द प्रोसेस ऑफ डिमोलिशन, what were the forces within all communities and what were the ideologies which were in play. So just actually that will help more to Hyderabadi Muslims and the Telugu Hindus कि ये रिकंसिलिएशन के ऊपर भी एक बुक इस तरह से होनी चाहिए कि प्रोसेस में कोई हिंदू मुस्लिम इतना नहीं था जितना इंटरेस्ट का मामला था।
जी बिल्कुल। तो मखदूम की एक किताब है 1947 के नाम से, जो 1947 में लिखी गई उर्दू में, और उस पर बैन लगा दिया गया था हैदराबाद में। मगर अभी उस 2 साल पहले उसकी डिस्कवरी हुई है। तो जो मैं किताब का जिक्र कर रहा था उसमें वो ऐसे भी है। तो उसमें वो बता रहे हैं कि ओनली 20 families were attached and direct beneficiaries from the Nizam. So there is an elite perspective, but there was also another narrative of Deccani nationalism, which included Hindus, Muslims, everybody.
Yeah.
So those kind of nuanced perspectives should definitely be brought out. So,
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल ये तो बिल्कुल इस टाइप की चीजें रिलीज करनी चाहिए, टॉक होनी चाहिए। बिकॉज यू कैन सी टुडे, आपको मैं बताऊं, जो ये टाइटल देख के हैदराबाद से इतने लोग थे, लेकिन उसी हैदराबाद स्टेट के तेलुगु जो एलिमेंट्स थे वो इसमें नहीं थे, यानी हिंदू नेम बहुत कम मैंने देखा जो हमारे, जबकि उसमें नहीं होता, सब रहते हैं। तो ये या तो उनकी ऑलरेडी जजमेंटल थे वो कि इसमें क्या होगा, मुस्लिम पास की खाली बात हो रही। मुस्लिम पास्ट में भी मोर इलोबरेशन होना चाहिए इस बात पे कि कौन सा मुस्लिम पास क्या था।
एग्जैक्टली
रॉयल मुस्लिम पास था, जो आम बेचारे मुसलमान थे, माइनॉरिटी में सही पॉपुलेशन में, उनकी हैसियत क्या थी, और जो आम हिंदू थे उनकी हैसियत क्या थी। इस मुस्लिम पास्ट में, मुगल पास्ट में इंडिया का क्या हाल था, उसमें सब आते हैं। मुगल पास्ट में खाली मुगलों की महल की बात तो नहीं होगी।
जी जी नहीं, बिल्कुल इन्होंने किताब में लिखा है इस पॉइंट पर भी, मगर मेरे ख्याल से वो टॉक के लिए शायद उनकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग थी कि कोई मखसूस तबका आ रहा है, इस वजह से उन्होंने ऐसा किया। मगर किताब में काफ़ी डिटेल में लिखा है। और अभी मैडिसन में साउथ एशिया कॉन्फ्रेंस में इनका प्रेजेंटेशन भी था बुक के ऊपर। इट वॉज अ राउंड पैनल डिस्कशन, तो उसमें सारे ही लोग थे। It was a very enriching, enlightening discussion from on all sides.
गुड, थैंक यू। चलिए भाई, चलिए, बहुत अच्छा किया। बहुत दिनों बाद आपका चेहरा देखा मैंने। I mean, we used to be quite in regular touch. Suddenly, you drop me out from your inner circle.
नहीं नहीं सर, मैं आपके गोशे से बाहर हो गया।
नहीं ऐसा नहीं, but I always followed you on the Facebook और इधर उधर तस्वीरें। वो आपका बेटा कितना बड़ा हो गया भाई?
मेरे 2 बेटे हैं, एक हाई स्कूल में है, 9th ग्रेड, और
जो पैदा हुआ था तो हमने फोटो भेजी थी मुझे।
जी जी जी
जी, अब वो हाई स्कूल हो गया।
हाई स्कूल हो गया। दूसरा 10 उससे 1 साल छोटा है।
आप सोच लीजिए, इतने दिन से आप गायब हैं हमारे।
नहीं आपके पास आप डीसी से कितनी दूर रहते हैं?
मैं डीसी से फ्रेडरिक जो है जस्ट 30 माइल्स, 40 माइल्स
अच्छा
के।
अच्छा, मुझे लाइब्रेरी ऑफ कांग्रेस आना है अगले साल, तो मैं इंशाल्लाह आपके पास हाजिरी
बिल्कुल
लगाता हूँ।
बिल्कुल आइए।